Greetings to you, happy warriors. I am your rabbi, Rabbi Daniel Lapin, revealing, as always, how the world really works. That's right. And I will take you for a short excursion into my childhood. So there I was, and I was 9 years old, 10 years old, and I was being raised in Johannesburg, South Africa. And I've got to admit, it was not an easy job for my parents. My parents were communal leaders. My father was a famous and much in demand rabbi. My mother was his close collaborator and partner. And you know how they say the shoemaker's children go barefoot. Well, it so happens I was turning into a bit of a barefoot savage, which is why my parents enrolled me in a school in London for a while. But that's another story. The part of the story I want to share with you today is that I used to love an American magazine called The Scientific American. Now, I didn't know anything about this at the time, but for your information, The Scientific American has been published continuously in the United States from before the American Civil War in the 19th century. And so I'll give you an example. I'm going back 60 years to the issue of February 1962. Okay? And I'm just a little kid, but the magazine, it was really hard to get in South Africa in those days, but the public library in Johannesburg used to get it. They used to get it about a month late, right? Because most mail came by ship, not by air in those days. That's true. Air transport of mail was very expensive. So I used to get the magazine about a month or 6 weeks late. I mean, when I say get it, I never got it, but I could go and read it in the public library, and that's exactly what I did. And so I want to give you an example of, and I'm just taking it round. I just said to myself, here I am recording the show for you, early February 2022. Let's go back 60 years exactly to February 1962. And I could have picked any. It makes absolutely no difference because I just want to read you some of the titles of the articles that appeared. Well, first of all, there were some regular columns. One was 50 and 100 years ago, where the Scientific American would go back to what the magazine was talking about exactly 50 years earlier and 100 years earlier. So it was really, really interesting. And yes, the magazine was being published in 1862. So in 1962, they did have the feature, what we were talking about 50 years ago and 100 years ago. I always liked that. And then they used to have a column called Science and the Citizen, which I liked as well. There was, something contemporary. Then they used to have book reviews, which, some of them were beyond my reach. I didn't understand what they were about. But then one of my favorite columns was mathematical recreation, mathematical games. And the author I remember to this day was a man called Martin Gardner. And his puzzles and paradoxes used to be collected into books every little while. And to this day, I still have them on my bookshelf. But now let's go to the specific articles of February 1962. Remember that a lot of the information in these articles is no longer fully up to date. For instance, one of the articles was entitled Messenger RNA. Right, and this has to do with our DNA strands, and so much more is known about this in the last 60 years than back then. But still, that was the article. Another article is called The Solar Chromosphere. All right, and I think that had to do with chromatic analysis of close to the sun. Again, I don't remember reading this particular article, to tell you the truth, and I don't have the article in front of me. I just have the title. But here's the third one of that same issue, February 1962: the physiological effects of acceleration. Okay, so yeah, that was interesting. It was the beginning of space. Now, the moon landing was 7 years ahead still, right? That was going to be in 1969. This is 1962. But Scientific American is saying, what is it going to be like? I mean, it's inevitable. Human beings are going to travel into space. There's going to be very rapid acceleration. When the rocket takes off, it's going to have to accelerate rapidly to escape the Earth's gravity. And fascinating. I mean, again, I don't remember the details of reading it, but I know that it would have fascinated me. Then they had a book. Then they had an article about the Etruscans, and they're going back to very, very old, ancient Mediterranean civilizations and what we know about them, and I would have found that interesting. Then they had an article, error correcting codes. Okay, and now we're talking about programming. Now, again, early days of programming, very early, and this idea that you can sort of build in error correction protocols. Fascinating, all right? And I mean, I was terrible at school, but this kind of stuff really interested me, and I definitely resonated with George Bernard Shaw, the English playwright's comment that it's a shame that people have to interrupt their education by going to school. That was very true for me, I have to tell you. I have no doubt that if I were going to school today, the me of 1962 would be in high school to junior high today, whatever. I have no doubt that provided my parents agreed, or maybe the school doesn't even require parental permission, I don't know. But I have no doubt that they would have tried to put me on Adderall or one of the mood and brain-changing drugs that they are now pumping into mostly boys in American schools. Used to be high schools. It's now all the way down to elementary schools as well. So... And so, yes, I was a bit precocious, as a kid to be reading error-correcting codes, and I didn't understand all of it, no question about it. I mean, I understood only a fraction of every issue, but I learnt things, and I found things that really interested me, which I probed further into in the public library. Then they had the next article, and by the way, as I said, I don't have the magazine in front of me. I just used the internet to pull up the table of contents of the Scientific American of 1962. Then they had, the next article was amoeboid movement, and that had to do with how single-cellular creatures like amoeba, how they actually locomote, how they get around. Fascinating. Then there was something on wear, and I'm not sure what that was about, to tell you the truth. And then there was something where they correlated and studied population density and things like various pathologies, like etc. You get the idea. Look, this was really, really interesting, no question about it. And I really used to, I used to get a lot out of it. Now, Scientific American is an entirely different magazine. It's unrecognizable, and to make my point, I'm just going to give you a few titles of articles that have appeared, in roughly the last year or so. Here's one: Modern Mathematics Confronts Its White Patriarchal Past, and now. Do you see the difference between that and an article on how amoeba move or error-correcting protocols in computer coding? Modern Mathematics Confronts Its White Patriarchal Past. And basically this article said that, if you want to know why there are so few women in the field of mathematics, in academic mathematics, it's because of misogyny. It's because of the hatred of women. Okay, I mean, you want to believe that? It's a free world, and that was the patriarchal past confronting its white past. The reason there are so blacks in academic mathematics is because of racism. And again, you can believe that if you wish, or you might choose to believe that it could conceivably have something to do with the fact that, let's take the city of Baltimore, where the majority of students in the city's public schools are African American, and where the overwhelming majority of these poor students get graduated from high school with a fourth grade understanding of mathematics. And maybe that has something to do with the fact why there are few African Americans doing mathematics in university level. Maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know the answer, but I do know it's a question that needs exploring. Yet now the Scientific American runs an article stating, right, it's asserting without any further investigation that the reason for few women and few blacks in academic mathematics is because of hatred of women and hatred of blacks. That's what it's about. Another one is how about this article? Also, this is just from within the last year. Basically, you cannot pick up an issue of Scientific American today where you do not find several articles honestly having nothing to do with science and having everything to do with pushing a political left-wing agenda. Here's one. This one is from July 2021. Listen to this title. Denial of evolution is a form of white supremacy. So in other words, denial of evolution. They love using this word. Are you a climate denier? Are you a vaccine denier? Are you a Holocaust denier? It's become a subtle and not so subtle way of casting aspersions on people without challenging their ideas, but turning it into an ad hominem attack. And so this article states that if you deny evolution, in other words, if you're not sure that unaided materialistic evolution, if you're unsure that that is a full explanation for the arrival of human beings on this lonely speck of dust in the universe, then you are a white supremacist. This beggars belief. This is so staggeringly asinine. But this is now what passes for science in the magazine The Scientific American. And so there it is. Okay. And by the way, the magazine said, people used to think the denial of evolution is all about religion, but it isn't. It's about white supremacy. No, I'm not saying it's all about religion at all. I'm saying it's all about science. I'm saying that looked at strictly objectively, if I was completely open-minded, the evidence is not satisfactory for evolution. There are huge problems. And the reason that this is an unacceptable position is because the presumption they take is that the only alternative explanation for how human beings can be found on this planet has to be creationism, that God created us. And that, of course, in the academy is utterly and completely unacceptable. But nonetheless, that's not what this article is that, well, if you deny evolution, you are a white supremacist. I have not read the article. My life is too busy. I have a life. I truly do not waste time on things that I know to be a real waste of time. And then finally, again, in the last year, this one was from September of last year, this one I couldn't leave out. This is absolutely terrific. Here's the title of the article. Why the term Jedi is problematic for describing programs that promote justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So listen to the initial words, the initial letters of those words, okay? I'll read the title again. Why the term Jedi is problematic for describing programs that promote justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So now what they're saying is, not only do you have to promote justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, but you mustn't even describe it using the acronym JEDI, which has been popular. They like the Star Wars theme idea, the Jedi from Star Wars, and they use those letters JEDI to stand for Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion. So the Scientific American, yes, the esteemed and looked up to magazine, the Scientific American, is wasting pages in its September article, in its September issue, with an article, Why the Term Jedi is Problematic for Describing Programs that Promote Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. You might be curious, what's wrong with the term Jedi? And they say, here's the problem. And by the way, you read this, and your first thought is that this is satire. This is being put out by one of the humorous websites. No, this is the Scientific American. And so what they say is, yes, the Jedi were heroes in the Star Wars universe, that's true, but they are completely inappropriate symbols for work having to do with justice. You got to remember that the Jedi are a religious order of intergalactic police/monks prone to white saviorism and toxically masculine approaches to conflict resolution, violent duels with phallic lightsabers, gaslighting by means of Jedi mind tricks. The Jedi are also an exclusionary cult, membership to which is partly predicated on the possession of heightened psychic and physical abilities. It goes on. It's too much. I can't waste your time anymore on this. But the reason I tell you this is because again and again you hear of politicians and bureaucrats and opinion makers, celebrities, and many others who will constantly use the phrase "follow the science," and this is usually in the context of COVID cures, of course. But what I want to explain to you is something which I've pointed out before if you're a regular listener, and that is, look, do I think that the Bible lies? Do I think that the core of religious thinking lies? No, I don't think the Bible lies at all. But I do think that there are occasional outlying rabbis and ministers and religious leaders who do lie. That's what I think. 5 minutes or less on Google will find you somebody with a Jewish name and the word rabbi ahead of the name who will explain to you that homosexual marriage is actually a good thing permitted by the Bible. It's just that we're interpreting the Bible incorrectly. I'm being quite serious. So, yes, I do think that rabbis and there are rabbis and ministers who lie. I don't think that the Bible lies. Why am I saying that? Because I want to make a parallel to science. Does science lie? Well, obviously there are certain relatively recent theories of science which have not yet fully moved past the theory stage, and they may turn out to be lies. But if you move back to things that have gone beyond the theory stage, do I think that the second law of thermodynamics is true? Yeah, I do. I don't think it's a lie. I think it's absolutely true. Do I think Newton's laws of motion are true? Is it true that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction? Yeah, that's absolutely true. Don't have to worry about that. Are there scientists who lie? Of course there are. There's nothing that you cannot find some scientists to say, and there is nothing that some scientists won't say. And look, I understand this. People have their interests at heart, And today, there are certain positions that if you take them, you are in such conflict with the political powers that be that you will not get a research grant, and you will become poisonous, and you won't be able to keep a job. I really do get that. But the rest of us need to get it as well. And we also have to understand that just because a scientist or 50 scientists or 100 scientists say something doesn't mean anything. The next thing you have to recognize is that the word scientist has no real meaning anymore today, because once the Scientific American carries articles such as those I've just described, then you have to know that the definition of the word scientist has spread so wide and so far as to not really have any meaning. And I'm accustomed to this because I will be the first to tell you that the word rabbi has absolutely no meaning. There is nothing to stop anybody calling themselves a rabbi. There really isn't. There's no trademark law about the word rabbi. There is no central authority. By the way, I think, and I'm just expressing an opinion that may be ignorant and wrong, but my impression is that you cannot get up and declare yourself a Roman Catholic priest, because there is a hierarchical system and a sort of apostolic succession system which says whether somebody is legitimately a priest or not. And so you would have thought that a rabbi, which means a teacher, and essentially a teacher of ancient Jewish wisdom and of the Torah, of the 5 books of Moses, which, by the way, to go back to my earlier example, is pretty explicit that 2 men may not marry, and it's pretty explicit that pork is not permitted for Jews to eat. Does that mean that I cannot find a rabbi who will permit both pork and homosexual marriage? Of course you can. There's no question about it. As I said, 5 minutes on Google, don't waste your time, but 5 minutes on Google and you'll find people with the title rabbi. Who gave them the title rabbi? It's irrelevant because there is no central authority. And so if Tom decides to anoint Jerry with the title rabbi and gives him a piece of paper that says, from Tom's School of Biblical Theology, Jerry is now given the title of rabbi, that's a piece of paper Jerry can hang on his wall, and from then onwards, Jerry calls himself a rabbi. Look, folks, I wish this weren't true, because for me it's embarrassing sometimes. Nonetheless, it's simply a reality. The same is true for the word scientist. I will confess that I have from time to time described myself as a scientist. Who's to deny me? Who's to call me wrong? I have worked as an electrical engineer. I do understand, and I have taught mathematics. I've taught physics at college level. And so, yeah, I'm a scientist. But really? I mean, really? Right? What am I? I'm a redneck rabbi who likes sailing. I mean, but I'm a scientist also. It's whatever you like, you see. There is not, by the way, it's different if you describe yourself and you try and practice as a medical doctor. I do believe you will come up short and run into some problems. But you go ahead and hang up a shingle as a rabbi, God bless you, go for it. There's nothing to stop you. And you want to hang up a shingle that says scientist, and then you write articles, and you can't give any scientific credentials, but, there you go. That's fine. And I say this because following the science today it's a big lie. It does not mean anything at all. And I just want to strongly urge you all to be really aware, strongly aware of that. I also want to ask you to be strongly aware that by going to my website, rabbidaniellapin.com, you can very easily from there jump over to the We Happy Warriors website. And I want to encourage you to formally join our community of happy warriors. You can become a basic member of the Happy Warriors community. And I think that's a good thing because it enables you to interact with other happy warriors. And I must tell you that on the Ask the Rabbi column, we answer the most interesting questions that we receive. But we've also noticed that on the We Happy Warriors, we find happy warriors connecting with other happy warriors. And many of the questions that people raise get responded to very intelligently by other happy warriors. And so we do encourage you to become a basic member of the Happy Warrior community. It's a few dollars a month, and if you are a coffee drinker, although I think fewer and fewer people, I haven't checked to see what Starbucks share prices have been doing over the last 2 years, but I've got to think that fewer and fewer people are drinking because a great deal of the Starbucks experience and part of the genius of Howard Schultz and his team at the beginning was realizing that Starbucks was much more than a place to get a cup of coffee, because you can't charge $3 for a cup of coffee, but you can charge $3 for an entire experience. And part of that was a Starbucks shop where you'd go in and you'd sit down, or maybe you'd stand and talk with people, whatever. But it was an experience. And so I've got to assume it's less, people are less involved in that today than they used to be. But at any rate, the realization was that it was a community. It was a basis of connection. And so that's what I'm suggesting now, that for an insignificant sum, it's really just enough to keep trolls out and to keep people who have nothing to contribute to the conversation out. But not only do you get access to material otherwise unavailable, but you also are able to communicate directly with other happy warriors and also with Mrs. Susan Lapin and myself. I am very fortunate. I get to communicate with her anytime I like. I was going to say for free, but I wouldn't say that that's entirely true. But we both work quite hard. At any rate, the website rabbidaniellapin.com, and you want to hop over to the We Happy Warriors, but you'll find it quite easily if you visit the rabbidaniellapin.com website, where we'd love to see you, we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to welcome you to the community of happy warriors. It's an international community, and there have been some fascinating exchanges recently. A very important piece, by the way, written by a gentleman called C.G. You've heard me talk about him before. He lives on the northern coast of Greenland. He is in the military, special operations, and a very, very interesting guy. Well, I just saw, because I'm on the comment site, and I saw that CG, along with several other people, were having a very hectic conversation, very, very positive and revealing conversation right there on the website. And CG always finishes his communications happy warrior reporting for duty, which I love. I cherish it. He concluded one letter recently, angry happy warrior, and he describes and he writes why he is angry. And I've got to think to myself that an angry CG would be a very formidable foe. So there it is. And I welcome, I hope you will be able to do that. Now, I want to tell you there is a very complex piece of ancient Jewish wisdom, which is conveyed in brevity, but it's been subject to enormous distortion and mischaracterization over the years. And the statement is fairly terse, but again, there is considerable teaching. In other words, when I was taught this for the first time, although what I'm going to tell you is going to take 10 seconds to communicate, the teaching it to me took about an hour and a half, maybe a bit more, close to 2 hours. And then when it was taught to me at a deeper level, it took even longer. So here is the statement in all its brevity. God sent 10 measures of communicative ability down to the world, talking ability, conversational ability. God sent 10 measures of conversational ability to the world. 9 were given to women, and the remaining 1 to men. Well, as you can imagine, from people who didn't know any of the background, and it's always going to be funny when people who don't know a topic to any depth whatsoever comment on it. I think that's true on theology, and it's true on every topic. And so similarly here, as you can imagine, I can't tell you how many times challengers have come up to me, and they're not asking me a question, they're telling me a question. What they say is, you see, Judaism is misogynistic, it dismisses women as talking too much, etc. And so, you can see how that goes. And so I'm not going to take the same 2 hours that I was presented with in explaining and understanding it. I was young and still not wise or knowledgeable in many ways at all. You all are considerably more sophisticated, and so it won't take you 2 hours to hear the explanation of what that really means. So what it means is that God created men and women very differently. Now, you do not have to believe in God. You do not have to be a Bible-centric individual to know that men and women are created very differently. We know that, by the way, one of the great things about raising children, and ideally having at least one boy and one girl so you can get to know and understand the differences, one of the things which is fascinating, and this is well known, you don't need to rely on science or scientists or experts or studies. You can just do this yourself, and that is put a rotating mobile on your young child's, a 2-month-old baby, 3-month-old baby. So on the bassinet, put one of these mobiles, either battery operated or you wind them up, and then this colorful thing is like a carousel, and things turn around, and little colored shapes bob and dance around. And then what you do is have the mom of the child come and look down at the child in the bassinet from one side of the bassinet, and on the other side the mobile is rotating. And you will see that if it's a baby girl, 9 times out of 10, well, I'm not going to be scientific about it, but most of the time it's very clear, she turns her head away from the mobile and gazes into the face of her mom. And now try the same thing with a boy baby, same age, everything the same, and overwhelmingly, the majority of times, the baby boy will he may glance momentarily when his mom just comes into his field of vision. He turns straight back to the moving mobile. Boys attracted to the movement, girls attracted to the face of mom. And this is just one minor little difference, but there are so many of them that you pick up as we go through. By the way, the different effect of alcohol on boys and girls of the same weight. So ordinarily, we measure the effect of alcohol based on body weight. And so it's true that a fixed amount of alcohol, however many ounces of alcohol this is going to be, it will have a much more pronounced impact on a boy that weighs, shall we say, 100 pounds over a boy or a male that weighs 180 pounds. And so you would have thought, well, how about alcohol, the same amount, on a boy weighing 110 pounds and a girl weighing 110 pounds should be the same, right? No, it isn't. Impact much more on the girl. And so one of the areas in which happy warriors are distinguishable from non-happy warriors is that we happy warriors are much less inclined to buy into conventional wisdom, because we realize now the extent to which politics has intruded into science, so-called science. And so we no longer trust what scientists say is the science. When people tell you it's established science, 97% of scientists agree that humans are causing catastrophic climate change or global warming, I go back to my cornflakes. I'm very relaxed, okay, because I don't buy it. Now, I hear the information. I don't accept it yet. I'm going to study it and figure it out and do the best I can for myself. In other words, happy warriors do not surrender their own free will to experts or studies or scientists or professors. We do not do that. We retain our claim to our own individuality, and we have confidence in our ability to understand things. Not everything, but we can understand a lot. And so we're not necessarily going to deal with our money in the way experts say. We're not going to deal with our family exactly the way experts say. We're not going to deal with our fitness or our friendships, certainly not our faith, and yes, as I said, not our family or our finances, according to what scientists say. No, I will take it into consideration, and I will note it, but I will not accept it at face value. I'm going to evaluate it. Because, as I taught you last week, scientists focus on information. And information exists in tall, isolated structures. And so, whilst a scientist may say one thing, I'm not sure that that's the entire story, because alongside that tower of information are 6 more towers of different kinds of information. And it is my job, as being the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of my life, it's my job to integrate all those pieces of information and arrive at a course of action that makes most sense. And so to let so-called scientists decide how I should space my children, how many children I should have, I won't do it. Or to let experts decide on whether I should retain faith or get rid of my faith. I wouldn't dream of doing that. Why would I hand over that control of a critical aspect of my life to somebody who is an information expert, not a wisdom expert? But for that, if that doesn't make sense to you, go back and listen to last week's show. You might have missed. Information or wisdom, one of those can save your life. And you got to know which it is and what the difference is. So we've got to know, and as painful as this is, we've got to know that science has been corrupted. And you only have to look at how the Scientific American has changed from February 1962 to the present to get a very clear picture of how science has been corrupted. Medicine, by the way, I'm sorry to say this because we all love our own doctors and we all believe our doctors are wonderful, but I'm afraid that today we all owe it to ourselves to be very skeptical about even what our own doctors tell us. You are in charge of your life. You cannot hand off authority. You are responsible for your children. You cannot hand off authority. You know, many people used to believe that I had people tell me this, all I've got to do, my responsibility as a parent, is to get the child onto the yellow bus at the end of the driveway every morning. Hand over responsibility to your local public school district. Okay, it's not like that. It really isn't. It's your responsibility, your life, your family, your children. Listen to other people. Listen to scientists, listen to experts, listen to academia, and weigh it all up and learn to acquire wisdom. And for wisdom, you have to be open to ideas that bother you. We call it cognitive dissonance, the tendency of human beings, all of us, to reject information that we find emotionally painful. Got to overcome that. And if there's one course of action in today's program that I want to emphasize, it is to make yourself open to information that is emotionally painful. At least consider it. I'm not saying you have to believe it. You not have to accept it. But listen to it seriously enough to be able to evaluate it. Because happy warriors are serious. We're not silly. We're serious. That doesn't mean we don't have a sense of humor. It doesn't mean that we can sometimes have delightful opportunities to spend time with friends and with family, where warm feelings of emotional connection and happiness just surge spontaneously into your soul, and there is laughter and joy in the air. That's all part of being a happy warrior. But we're serious about our lives. We're not silly. That contrast between silly and serious is a critical barometer for the happy warrior. That's who we are. And so, yes, it might be difficult for various reasons. It might be difficult for you, perhaps, to hear the idea that males and females are utterly different, that boys and girls are really, really different. I have a friend who is a biologist, and he gives me a lot of very useful information. He teaches me a lot. He is a specialist in the information silo of biology. And one of the things he once said to me is, he said, look, there are different ways of measuring DNA connectedness. He says, so I don't want to make a categorical statement as a scientist, but I will tell you that it is perfectly reasonable to say that a boy's DNA has more in common with a whale than that of a girl. And this was always a useful thing for me to remember, that in some ways and on some levels, a man's DNA has more in common with a whale than with a woman. It's important to remember that. And so when I say, yes, women have the gift of conversation, 9/10, and men only have it 1/10, this is a statement of reality. And that is that women connect much better than men do. And that this is one of the huge advantages to men in being married, that they are therefore much better connected. Men who are single tend to be less connected with family and friends because women maintain those connections. the Christmas cards, the happy birthday presents, the Thanksgiving invitations. Who handles that? In the overwhelming majority of families, that's mom who handles that, not dad, because connectedness is innate to her. If you call me up, and I'm very similar to most men in this respect, and that is that if you phone me up and you say, Rabbi Lappin, is that you? And I say, yes, who is this? And you say, this is John. Oh, John, how are you? Excellent, thank you. How are you? Fine, thank you, John. Rabbi, tell me, how's business been this last week? Thank you, John. Yeah, it's much to be grateful for. And how's your family? Yeah, John, thanks. Everybody's good. Thank God, we're good. And John says, Rabbi, and are you enjoying the weather where you are right? Yes. Do you know that any man listening to me now, most men listening to me now, I guess I should say, recognizes that I'm beginning to feel a bit itchy. Like, get to the point, will you? Like, John, what did you call me for? And then finally, John gets to the point and says, do you remember that stock I recommended you might want to invest in or look into last week? Well, I just want to tell you, I've changed my mind. The factors that I thought were relevant. Okay, thank you, John. I really appreciate it. I'll go back and look at it again, or maybe I'll have to sell some stock or whatever. But I appreciate the call. Have a good day. Talk to you soon. Bye. And the conversation is done. By contrast, most women will be comfortable having a conversation that goes on for quite a while. And at the end of it, you might say to the woman, who was that? Oh, she says, that was Shirley. And you say, oh, what did she want? And the answer is, nothing. Well, what was the call about? We just hadn't spoken for a while. That is very, very feminine, much more than for men. And ancient Jewish wisdom praises and applauds that fact about women. And it's saying to men, you got to understand this. You got to appreciate this. Not because you can ever become a woman, not because you will ever learn to communicate in quite that fashion, but because you need to understand the value of that, even though it's not innate to you and never will be. And so the differences between men and women are very real, and we have to know them. Another aspect of that same difference is that, in general, women are comfortable talking and feeling. And so very often a woman might say, I just feel this, or I just feel that, and the woman she's talking to will say, yeah, I know just what you mean. By contrast, when I say I feel, the only time I say that, and in private, intimate communication with my wife, I might well say I feel, but in ordinary interpersonal communication, the only time I say I feel would be in a negotiation where I want to leave room for the discussion. And so I don't want to state as a fact that your price is out of range, because then the other party has to get defensive and say, no, it's not out of range. And now we have a disagreement, which is an obstacle to effective negotiation, which is to arrive at a mutually beneficial and profitable transaction. That's the purpose of a negotiation. And so when I would not say, I think the price is too high, I would say, I feel the price is too high, because then a smart and experienced negotiator on the other side would say, I can understand you feeling that. Tell me why you feel that. And then we're still in negotiation. We're still in conversation, and the relationship is still constructive. But other than that, I tend not to say I feel, because I'm a man, and it's just not who I am. I will say what I think, but I will couch it in terms of what I think, and I'm absolutely ready to give you the reasons. You might say to me, well, why do you think that? And I'll tell you. Because if I didn't have the reasons, I wouldn't have had any rational basis to say, I think. But if I say, I feel something, and many times a woman will say, I just feel this, and I say, well, why do you feel that? And you say, I don't know, I just feel it. How can you can't argue with that, and you're not meant to. And that's why it's useful in negotiations, because there is no argument with somebody who says, I feel. There is an argument with somebody who says, I think. And so in ordinary communication, I use I think or I believe, and I'm ready to explain why. But where I am trying to communicate and where the connection and the conversation is in and of itself an end and a purpose, I will use a feminine style of conversation using I feel. Okay, I hope that makes sense to you. It's there's nothing here that is terribly controversial, but in general, women tend to be very comfortable talking and feeling. Men, on the other hand, a little bit different. But yes, with men, it's really very different. And so inasmuch as, in general, women are very good at feeling and talking, men are better at deciding and acting. That's right. In general, men are more decisive than women, and men tend to action more easily and quickly than women. Now, one has to be aware of these things because obviously there are times when these things are disadvantages to each gender, and we have to know it. So yes, of course, there are times where a man has to slow down his tendency to arrive at a decision and act on it, and there are times where a woman has to say, this isn't a time for endless conversation and discussion about feelings. This is a time for action, right? We're balanced human beings, and we operate on a spectrum line. What I mean by that is that you have to get used to looking at this as a line in front of you, stretching from left to right. You can imagine it, you can visualize it in your mind's eye. And over at one end, you have talk, feel, and over at the other end, you have decide and act. And in general, that side which is decide and act is the side where the male part of the population tends to congregate, and the side where it says feel and talk, that's kind of where the the female side of the population tends to congregate. And then, there is a smattering of men as you move towards the center, fewer and fewer, and there's a few women dotted around there, and as you move towards the end, you have more and more, most women gathered towards that end, right? It's a statistical distribution, if you like, if you're into the technical terminology, but that's how we scientists explain it, right? So the reason I mention this today is because there are lots of forces in the culture over the last number of years already that have been driving away from the male end, driving away from decide and act towards feel and talk. And I want to give you some examples of that. For those of you who are interested, there's a lot more on this topic. I'm only going to spend a few minutes on it. But it's a big topic because you might find yourself, you might be a man who says to yourself, hey, you know what? I've been impacted by this. I have been made to be less act inclined, and tended to be, I've been moved towards the talk feel side of it. And this could be a problem. Yeah, it could be. It could be a problem in business, right? It could be a problem in your F of finances. It could also be a problem in your romantic relationships, the family part of things. Yes, it could be. Because most women want to be married to masculine men. But unfortunately, particularly in American society, but this is true in a large part of the Western world today, it's also true in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and certainly parts of Europe, even or certainly, and that is a tendency towards denigrating masculinity. And it's a real problem because deep down, the majority of women want a masculine man. As one of the great feminists of, I think, the 1960s or 1970s, Germaine Greer, I believe it was her, famously said, we have succeeded in feminizing men, just as we've been trying to do, and now we only want to date truck drivers and mechanics. It's a great point. I mean, and you know, bless her for her honesty. Yeah, that's true. On the one hand, politically and socially, women help to denigrate masculinity, but then what they end up with is a man that they're not attracted to. It's a huge problem. And so, you know, you might well say to yourself, hey, you know, I'm a guy, and yet I suddenly recognize that I need correction. I need to work on myself. I'm a happy warrior. I never take myself just as I am. I'm never content with the status quo. No, I'm a happy warrior. And therefore, I've got to catch myself. When I find myself just talking or thinking about something endlessly, I've got to say to myself, you know what, 5 more minutes and then it's time for a decision and some action. That's got to be how it is. You might be a woman married to a guy like this, where you say to yourself, I just wish he was less talky-feely, and I need him to be decisive and action-oriented. And what do you do in that situation? Okay, look, why has this been happening? There's a lot of it. I'm not going to go into all the reasons now. This is a big topic. It's going to be heavily dealt with in my new book, which will be published by Wiley soon. And I'll tell you all about it. Don't worry. I told you that not to tantalize you, but in order to help motivate and galvanize me to action. I've got to finish the job, and so if I've committed to you to have the book out, well, that'll help me just get to it and make sure that I do less talking and more acting. And by the way, anybody who doubts that those two are opposite ends of the spectrum, just be aware, and as soon as I say this, many of you are going to relate to it. You're totally going to understand what I'm talking about when I tell you that you can sometimes dissipate your energy by too much talking. Sometimes intuitively, we guys will say, you know what, I'm working on this new project. I don't want to tell you too much about it now. I'll show it to you soon. Because we have an innate understanding that talking is at the opposite end of doing. And sometimes too much talking detracts energy from the doing, subtracts energy from the doing. Because talking and doing are opposite ends of each other. And feeling and deciding are opposite ends of each other as well. I feel this, I feel that. I can go on feeling things for the rest of the day. But at some point, you got to stop feeling and start deciding. And even when I decide, it doesn't mean I don't have feelings the other way, because life is complex, and many decisions that I take, I have mixed feelings about. Mixed feelings, right? But that's okay. I've got to make a decision, and I'll go ahead and make it. That's really important. And so A number of the factors, I'll give you one. More and more people have undergone therapy than ever before. If we would have spoken to somebody in, let's say, not 50 years ago, not 60 years ago, but shall we say 100 years ago, or for that matter, before 1962, the likelihood that the person you're talking to has ever been in something called therapy, it was close to zero, didn't exist. But now there's a whole lot of it. And I actually want to do a show about how destructive it can be, particularly for men. But for now, I'm sure you're already getting the point. Because when you're in therapy, you talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and you talk some more, and you talk and talk and talk and talk, and you talk more, 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 and the therapist says to you, so tell me how you feel about what your mother did. Tell me how you feel about talk, 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 talk. My friends, if you're a guy and you've had years of therapy, then almost for sure you are too far away from the male end of that spectrum line. You're too far away from the deciding and acting, because so much talking has actually hurt you, not helped you. So please do entertain this idea. You know, when I talk to you about being skeptical of so-called experts and be skeptical of scientists, it applies to everything. And I never want you to take what I say just on value itself. I want you to think about it and evaluate it. And I'm human, so I love hearing from you. I get emails all the time from you saying, you know what, I didn't want to hear this thing you said on the show. Remember when you said this, I really rejected it. I didn't want it, but I forced myself to think about it. And you know what? I'm doing it. You're 100% right. It's made a huge difference in my... I love hearing that, because I think I'm telling you the truth. I believe I'm telling you the truth. But you must be skeptical. You should be. What I'm telling you now is that for many men, lengthy periods of therapy carries with it the danger of demasculinizing. Sorry, but it's a reality. I also will say that if you were put on drugs because the school found you difficult to deal with, then more than likely you also need to work on this. You were hurt in that area. Somebody made the point, I wish I'd thought of this, but it was a beautiful point. I'm thinking it was Dr. Leonard Sachs, maybe. I don't remember exactly who it was. But the point was that if you've ever read the Mark Twain's book about Tom Sawyer, and you take a look at the life of Tom Sawyer, and you look at his interactions, you would realize that today, if Tom Sawyer was at school today, he would be accused of toxic masculinity. He would almost likely be put on Ritalin or Adderall or any of the other drugs they put kids on. Mostly, when I say kids, I mean mostly boys. Okay, so please be aware. Perfectly normal masculine behavior. You understand, we guys were not built to sit at a classroom desk for 8 hours a day from, the age of, from the age of 5 or 6 or 7 all the way to the age of 17. No, we were not. And that is one of the reasons that many families choose homeschooling, because for boys, they can intersperse the schooling with outdoor activities. And so it's perfectly natural and perfectly normal for boys not to be inclined to do that. Here's another problem. Co-ed schooling. Many families have discovered that their boys do much better in single-sex schools than they do in co-ed. Going to a boys' school, they do a whole lot better. There's a very good reason for that. If you think about the spectrum line, and you think about a perfectly normal teacher would tend to say to themselves, well, look, I've got the spectrum line, I've got a whole bunch of girls who tend to talk and feel, and I've got a whole bunch of boys, and I've got girls who sit quietly at the desk and they relate to me and they cooperate with each other, but I've got a whole bunch of boys who are bouncing off the ceiling. And so they set normal sort of somewhere in between, and that makes all the boys toxically masculine. These are very, very real problems. And so on today's show, I'm not going to go further into great depth, other than to tell you that there have been social and cultural forces at work for the last few decades, increasingly so. I mean, this started 50, 60 years ago, but increasingly in the last 10 or 15 years, more so than ever. And so in terms of self-awareness, just ask yourself, if you're a guy, just ask yourself whether events in your life and circumstances in your life may have nudged you unhealthily away from the masculine act, decide end of the spectrum line. Maybe you're a guy and you can't make up your mind whether to commit to marriage. You're having trouble deciding whether to get engaged to a girl you've been dating for 11 years or whatever it is. And maybe this is very possibly what it's about. You are busy feeling this and feeling that. Some days you feel you want to spend the rest of your life with her. Other days you feel differently. And you want to talk about this to her until she just can't take it anymore. Have you had that experience, right? Where you drive the girl you love crazy because instead of deciding and acting, you talk and talk and talk and talk. And you talk about your feelings and more about your feelings. And you talk even more about your feelings. It's enough to drive any woman mad. And there's something to be done about it, and off you go. Time to deal with this. Take yourself in hand and start moving yourself back towards the end that a man belongs at, or closer to that end. You don't have to be all the way, but you need to be on that side of the spectrum line. What about if you're a woman married to a guy? That's always more difficult because what do you do in that? How do you help your man move back? Maybe he has been impacted by this. He's been taught to believe that masculinity is toxic. And yes, I mean, the culture is very feminized today. And I'm quite sure, by the way, that part of the reason that America, so many Americans had this visceral hatred for President Donald Trump was because he was masculine. And he came across as a masculine man. With, by the way, there are disadvantages there as well, right? Who would disagree with that? I work better as part of a married team because I have a wife who makes up for my terrible male deficiencies. I do have many male deficiencies, and they are masculine deficient. Because I'm a man, they are what I am, and it's harder for me to do certain things. I have a wife. That's wonderful. I'm blessed. But it's very easy to see the effect to which many men in American society have been feminized. All right, it's tough. Maybe you're a man who was brought up by a single mom. Maybe you're a man who was brought up by a single mom and you spent a lot of time with her mom, with your grandmother. Okay, these are difficult situations. And they're not the way God planned for humanity to live. So not surprisingly, they come with downsides. And this is obviously not to detract from the often heroism of some dedicated single moms, but it does come with a downside. You've got to be aware of that. So if you're a guy and you've got this realization that, hey, you know what, he's talking about me, there are things you can do about that. If you're a woman married to a guy in that situation, it's a little bit more difficult. And here's what you will have noticed happening. You see, nature abhors a vacuum, and a marriage abhors a vacuum of masculinity. And so if the man is not exerting masculinity, then guess what happens? Very often the wife does. And the wife becomes that missing masculinity force. So clearly, obviously, one thing, and again, I'm dealing with this very, very briefly because we're at the end of the show, but one aspect of that is to back off and in essence, I'm going to use a word that is fraught with all kinds of meanings and emotions, but I'm going to use the word surrender. Back off and leave room in a way that demands masculinity fill in. But there are also other things to do, having to do with involving other men, because I will hear things, I will hear criticism from a man, a friend or somebody, a man I respect. I will absolutely hear that criticism. I won't be joyful about it. I will be somewhat sorrowful and maybe even embarrassed, but I will hear it. But I'll never hear it from my wife directly. It's just plain different. And so women have to know that there is a limit to what they can directly do in these kinds of areas. Anyway, that is as far as we're able to go on this topic for today, but at least I hope I have raised it for your consideration and for your ability to estimate whether this is of significance and value to you or to somebody you care about. And so don't be intimidated by scientists, or by rabbis for that matter. Don't be intimidated by so-called experts or by studies that reveal or show or prove. No, remember, you are a happy warrior, and that means that you have God-given intelligence, and you have a God-given brain, and you do have the ability to evaluate things for yourself. Listen to experts, listen to scientists, listen to rabbis, but always do not surrender your ability to think it through yourself and to make the decision that is best appropriate for you and your life, because nobody but you is captain of your soul. You are in charge of your life. Visit the website rabbidaniellapin.com for more resources on this topic. By the way, we're at the very end of the sale period on the Financial Prosperity Package. And so if you really hurry up, you will find that if you go to the store at rabbidaniellapin.com, there is financial prosperity information that you will be able to take advantage of. And obviously, of course, there is the ability to become a basic member of our Happy Warrior community. So visit rabbidaniellapin.com and let's hear from you. Thank you for being part of the show. I thank all of you who have so effectively been promoting the show, telling friends about it. I appreciate that very much indeed. It's been fun to watch the show grow. And until next week, I urge you to stay focused on your family, on your finances, on your friendships, on your fitness, and on your faith. I'm Rabbi Daniel Lapin. God bless.